Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to talk about the 1981 film Escape from New York, and I have iconic cover here. This is a making of book on the film, which I'll refer to later. So, this film was directed by John Carpenter. It was written by Carpenter along with Nick Castle, who famously played the Shape or Michael Myers in the first Halloween film. This had been a movie Carpenter had been working on since the mid 70s, and it was his return to science fiction in some ways. I had talked about Dark Star, the film he had made with Dan O'Bannon when they were students, and then Carpenter made Assault on Precinct 13 in '76, and then had done Halloween, which was a huge success. And then The Fog came after Halloween. He had also done a few TV movies there. He had done the TV movie about Elvis, which starred Kurt Russell playing Elvis Presley. So that began a great collaboration that Carpenter and Russell would do many films together. So Escape from New York kind of came out of the context of the mid 70s of political corruption with Watergate and this growing distrust of institutions happening in American society. And Escape from New York, just a little bit about the plot of the movie. So, as we get from the opening narration, it is set in 1997, and the crime rate has exploded in the United States, and the entire island of Manhattan has been turned into a prison. A wall has been built around the island, and all the worst criminals are sent there, and the criminals basically have their own brutal society they've developed inside the ruins of what was once New York City. And we meet Snake Plissken, who we learn was a war hero, and we also get the sense that there was a war, a kind of a major Third World War type conflict going on between the superpowers. Plissken was a one-time pilot, a hero of the war, but became disenchanted and became a criminal. And when the movie begins, he's been arrested for trying to rob the treasury. And there's actually a sequence of the movie that was completely cut out of the heist of Plissken and his accomplice robbing the federal treasury, which is about an 8-10 minute sequence, which you can watch on YouTube. And I can understand why it was cut out, because the scene doesn't really add much to the story. I mean, really all we need to know is that Snake is a criminal and he's being arrested, but it's a great sequence, and I'm sure it hurt to cut it out of the movie because it was really well done, and the music's great, and just a really nice set piece. But I think it's included on DVD extras and things like that, so it almost works as like a short film, like a little prologue that gives us some insight about the characters and a little bit more about the world anyway. So there, once the film begins, Plisken's been arrested. He meets Hawk, played by Lee Van Cleef, who gives Snake a deal. Okay, the president has been, a revolutionary group has hijacked Air Force One, caused it to crash, and the president, played by Donald Pleasance, is in New York City. The plane crashed in New York City, and they want to send Plisken in there to rescue the president. In return, he will get a full pardon for his crimes. And to make sure he does actually do it, they put these implants in him where if he doesn't do it in 24 hours, he will die of a heart attack. So, and there's a big summit coming up that could end the war, apparently. So they have to get the president out immediately, even, assuming he's still alive. Okay, so that's the setup of the movie. Great cast. I mentioned Kurt Russell, who had worked with Carpenter earlier, and Russell is known for his Disney movies. He was a big Disney star in the 1970s, and I think he had done Used Cars, the comedy, the Robert Zemeckis comedy, around the same time as Escape from New York. But this role of Snake Plissken was a real a big leap forward for Kurt Russell, where he would be able to become an action star, really from the 80s up to the present day. And just the whole Snake Plissken character that was developed, where clearly based on the Clint Eastwood Man with No Name from the Dollars trilogy, but also drawing upon a lot of characters out of pulp westerns, and the whole idea of Snake is that he doesn't really care about anybody or anything, or so we're told, and that gives his character a real, I think, someone audiences, especially in the early 80s, could identify with. Someone who was just so fed up with the system, and he's being forced to do this job, and he's going to do it, but he's going to do it despite all the obstacles placed on him. He's going to do it his way, and of course he ends up getting the last laugh by the end of the film. It's a great cast as well. There's Lee Van Cleef, who I mentioned, who was in the spaghetti westerns with Eastwood. Ernest Borgnine as Cabby. Donald Pleasance, perfect as this kind of very superficial president of the United States. Isaac Hayes in here as the Duke, who runs Manhattan, and Harry Dean Stanton kind of plays Duke's second in command, I guess you could say. Adrienne Barbeau, a Carpenter regular, is in the film as Maggie. Tom Atkins as well plays a police officer, and he would become part of the Carpenter company as well. So it's rounded out by a really good cast, and I think what Carpenter manages to do with this movie, where it was low budget, okay, and it is set in New York City, but it was mostly filmed in East St. Louis, and they decided it was filming in New York City at night would have been logistically a nightmare, so they couldn't do it. And instead of going to a studio backlot to do it, like Ridley Scott would do with Blade Runner, it was decided, let's film it in East St. Louis, because there's a lot of, urban decay happening in that location, and it will be perfect for the dystopian vibe of the movie. So that's where it was filmed, and that gives it a real sense of setting the movie. And I think what Carpenter's doing here, he's drawing upon pulpy westerns, pulpy science fiction of previous decades of the 50s and 60s. Not all that different than what like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas were doing, where they were taking B-movie concepts, whether it was from old Flash Gordon serials or old, monster movies, and making them bigger and, kind of adding a little bit more prestige to those stories. And Carpenter's doing something similar with the pulpier approach to westerns and science fiction. He was working with a low budget, I think $5 million was the budget, but being able to do so much with that budget with the film. And I think that's part of the charm of it, why the film has endured. You have the matte paintings and a lot of practical effects, a lot of practical stunt work, all that. James Cameron worked on this film, helping out with some of the art direction and even film some of it. So Carpenter had a great team around him. Dean Cundy did the cinematographer, one of my favorite cinematographers, who just incredibly filming these night scenes and the lighting, like that bluish white sheen that you get with so many Cundy movies, with the Halloween movies he shot, and later he would work with Zemeckis and Back to the Future. The look of the film is so distinct. There's just such a craftsmanship that went into making the film. And I've heard criticisms that the characters in the movie are maybe a bit too one-dimensional, but I don't know if I would agree with that. But it works for the context of the movie, I think, where it's this drawing upon the traditions of, it works well, whether it's the old B-movie westerns or, the old science fiction movies and all that type of thing. It works well, but it has this modern sensibility that Carpenter brought to it, and I've also heard that the Pliskin character is also kind of based on Carpenter, just someone who, who is always bucking up against the system, and wants to make films his way, tell stories his way, and just that no compromise attitude that Carpenter became known for in his career. So, and the music as well, which Carpenter composed, mainly all synthesizer score, working with Alan Howarth as well, and these two guys putting these synthesizer scores together, and just it adds so much to the vibe of the movie. It gives it that kind of punkish aesthetic to it, that grungy aesthetic to the movie that just works so well with the music, and it's such a highlight of the movie. Yeah, and I should talk about, to share a bit of a personal memory with this. I remember being very young and going to a video store, and this was in the town I grew up in. There was a store that actually had video disc, which were put out by RCA for a brief time in the early mid '80s, and you could rent out a machine and put the disc into the machine. Basically, it ran on a needle, and I guess it was similar to Laserdisc, I guess, but video discs were around for a very short time, and I remember the poster on the video disc as a little kid, and just being so enraptured by the poster for this film. And here's another look at it here, which you can see. It was designed by Barry E. Jackson, and it's just such a striking image with the Statue of Liberty, kind of drawing upon Planet of the Apes there, using, there's a lot of American iconography in Escape from New York. The American flag is often seen in the background, and the landmarks throughout New York, whether it's the public library or the Chock full of nuts or the 69th Street Bridge. I think that work gives the film this other great level to it, where it's drawing upon iconography, but kind of looking at it through a more jaundiced eye, a more cynical eye, okay, about how we're supposed to feel about America, and what the reality is like. So it works well, and it has one of the most perfect endings of all time too, where Snake eventually gets the last laugh. We end on this joyfully nihilistic note. It's a great joke that ends the movie, and Donald Pleasance, once again, of course iconic in Halloween, but here as this very kind of superficial president. But what I like about the film too is that even the characters we're supposed to hate, they still have heroic moments in some ways, and even Donald Pleasance, as unremarkable as his character is, he still has a few moments in the movie where, okay, he's a person, he's a human being as well, but the final confrontation between him and Pliskin is really good and really memorable. So yeah, I think just the overall vibe of this movie, it's the aesthetics of it are just incredible. Early 80s aesthetics, and probably my favorite John Carpenter film. I know everyone loves The Thing, The Thing is a masterpiece, not going to dispute that, but Carpenter was on such a run from the 70s and really into the early 90s, and this movie is just such a strong entry in the Carpenter canon. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later.